Our world is extremely worrisome. Almost every single day, many times an hour, sometimes we wonder if we will be okay. We wonder how we look, if we'll have enough good food to eat, about our shelter, about every single possible need. But although worry can be justified sometimes, worry is in fact not always necessary. God provides. And we'll see that in answering today's question. Does God reveal himself through providence? To answer this question, we'll look at three separate points. First, we'll look at Bible verses that demonstrate how God provides. Second, we'll look at the catechisms and creeds from the church, again reaffirming this principle of God's providence. And third, we'll look at a heresy that claims that God does not, in fact, provide in the way that he revealed in Scripture. Let's start off with these Bible verses. One of the most famous examples of God's providence is given in Matthew 6:28-30. In this chapter, Jesus is giving a sermon. And here he says, quote, "Why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, will he not much more clothe you?" Unquote. So here, Jesus is saying that we should not worry, because if God provides even for the lowliest creatures, for grass, for birds, for flowers, then obviously he will provide for us who have been made in his image. He is in control of the world, and and everything that happens to us is predestined by him. Similarly, Acts 14:16-17 says that God, quote, "did not leave himself without witness, for he did good by giving you rains from heaven and fruitful seasons," unquote. Again, this reaffirms the principle that God directs the earth to provide for us. Even when we don't see it, there are small things that benefit us, that are from God in the world. The rain falling, the sun shining, the beauty of the world, all of these don't necessarily look like God's hand acting, but they are, because creation is God's work. So God is using his work to care for us. He doesn't necessarily need to appear as a person in order to bless us and to provide for us. He can do that simply through his mere creation. Now let's look at some of the creeds and catechisms of churches to see how church history reaffirms this principle of God's providence. The Heidelberg Catechism in question and answer 27 says that God's providence is his almighty and ever-present power by which he upholds heaven and earth and all creatures, and so rules them, that all things in fact come to us not by chance but from his fatherly hand. Again, this is the idea of providence, that everything comes from God, that he is in absolute control. This should give us hope, because it shows us that God is the one who gives us everything we have. So we need not worry about what will happen next, because we know that it is controlled by him. So, we can also see from the Belgic Confession, Article 13, where it says that God upholds and governs all things, so that nothing happens in the world without his orderly arrangement. We can remember this the next time something evil or unfortunate happens to us. We can remember that this is a test from God instead of an uncontrolled random act. If everything comes from God, then we have no need to hate the acts or fear the acts that come to us. We can remain calm because everything that comes at us is under control. Finally, let's look at a heresy, let's look at the heresy of deism. Deism denies that God is involved in the world after creation. It effectively says that God created the world and simply exited it. He left. It doesn't say that God's dead, but that he just created the world and is asleep. But that's not the God Christians believe in. Christians don't believe in a God who created the world and simply left. We believe in a God who created the world and sustains it, who upholds it. And we know that God cares for the world more deeply than to just leave it, because he even sent Jesus to come rescue the world and to save us from sin. Time and time again, God battles against sin and works to set us free from it. This is again an example of God's providence. As we've seen by looking at Bible verses, church history, and the heresy of deism, we've seen that throughout the Bible, God's providence is affirmed.